Okay, right. We've been talking about sexual selection as kind of an aspect of overall life history evolution. And I think where we ended, I covered Bateman's rule and then pointed out there were so many exceptions to it that it really didn't count as a very good rule at all. Bateman's rule basically states that it's evolutionarily advantageous for males to be competitive and also promiscuous because they can increase the number of offspring that they have by such behaviors. It is not evolutionarily advantageous for females to do such. I then pointed out how there's a lot of exceptions, and many of them are reversed in species in which males invest as much or more energy in reproduction than females. You know, it is common for females to have to invest more. The idea being that, you know, a female mammal has to make a larger gamete, nourish it in her body, and then if it's a mammal, of course, do you know, feed the offspring with milk afterwards, and that's a very large investment of metabolic energy. A male mammal need only contribute a teaspoon of fluid in 2 minutes of his time. However, in a lot of species, they're not nearly that asymmetric, and males may invest more than females, and in those species, we often get Bateman's rule reversed. But even then, we find so many cases where we don't find exactly what we would suspect, that just about any rule is going to, that you try to come up with is going to have so many exceptions that it doesn't work very well as a rule. Now, we do get competition in many species within members of one sex for breeding rights to the other. And this is where we'll pick up competition within members of one sex, that's intrasexual competition, may be a fight to the death in cases where the stakes are sufficiently high. But one of the things we find is that natural selection often favors the evolution of non-lethal combat. Sometimes displays where, you know, competitors for mates may not come into physical contact at all. And I can probably best explain that by going right to an example. Okay, northern elephant seals. The males weigh something like 3 times as much as the females. I don't know if you've ever seen elephant seals, but the males have these huge bulbous air sacs on their nose. It doesn't really look like an elephant's trunk, but I guess it kind of could. And northern elephant seals have a rather odd population structure. Most males never get to breed. Fewer than 1/3 of male northern elephant seals even get to copulate. And the top 5 males may do 50% of the copulation. The biggest and the strongest males control harems of females and mate with them pretty much at will. They're actually pretty terrible fathers. The most common cause of death for elephant seal pups is getting squashed by dad, not looking where he's going. Because on land, they're of course very clumsy and, you know, do this, you know, blump, blump, blump means of locomotion. And in this species, males compete by rearing up and stabbing at each other. They've got huge canine teeth. And these two have both cut each other up pretty badly. And they'll just stab at each other and smash into each other, and each one weighs well over 1,000 pounds. So you've got, you know, these 1,000-pound weights of solid muscle slamming into each other. It's absolutely vicious, and it's frequently lethal. It often ends with one that dies. think for a minute about why. If you are a male elephant seal and you have genes that assume for the moment that behavior is modified by genes. Let's say you have genes that encourage you not to fight to the death, but to run away when things get bad. You may never get to pass them on, right? You're always going to end up with sand kicked in your face. You might end up getting killed if the guy you're fighting doesn't feel the same way. If you're an elephant seal and you have genes that encourage you to fight to the death, you might think those genes would not get passed on because if you fight to the death and you lose, you're dead, right? But in this case, if you win, you immediately get access to 24 females who are quite ready for you to make them pregnant. Yes? So if you win, you immediately get the chance to pass on lots and lots of your genes, right? You might think that fighting to the death would be selected against, that a more worthwhile strategy would be, you know, if you fight and run away, you'll live to fight another day. In this particular species, it doesn't work out that way. Even if those genes have a 50-50 chance of getting you killed, they've also got a 50-50 chance of you winning the genetic lottery and immediately siring 24 little offspring. So in that particular circumstance, fighting to the death is not selected against. In other species, it might be. Here's a couple of male giraffes neck wrestling. They will, you know, wrestle with their necks. They can slam those horns into each other, and they can hurt each other pretty badly. But competition is usually not lethal. Giraffes do not usually kill each other when fighting over females. And in that species, much less is at stake because male giraffes don't defend these big harems of fertile females. If you're a male giraffe and you fight to the death, you've got a good chance of dying. On the other hand, in this species, if you're a male giraffe and you have genes that encourage you to fight and run away and live to fight another day, those have much greater odds of getting passed on successfully. Because the sex ratios are not nearly as biased, you'll eventually get your chance, or at least you've got a better chance of doing it because you don't have just a few giraffes that are monopolizing all of the females. So in species where the stakes are not nearly that high as they are in elephant seals, we often have less lethal forms of male competition that have been selected for. It may be just physical displays. It may be crazy dance moves like the Laws Parotia bird of paradise in New Guinea, where the males basically spread their wings out in a very odd shape and start twerking. It could be song or something like that. But very often it's not lethal. And the reason is that unless you have a situation like the northern elephant seals, fighting to the death is not adaptive. If you have genes that make you want to fight to the death, the payoff is not worth the risk. Not that the males are consciously thinking this, but that's the way that selection is going to act. Males that fight to the death in most species will not pass on their genes nearly as often as males that fight, run away, and try again. But males can also compete without physical fighting, without dance-offs, without twerking like a Laws Parotia bird of paradise. Males can compete in the number and amount of sperm that they produce. There are some species in which a female that is fertile might mate with several males. And what that means is if a female that's fertile might have sperm from several males in her body at the same time, the likeliest winner is the one that produces more sperm, right? Every sperm is a ticket in the genetic lottery, and the more sperm you can crank out, the likelier you are to win, to have your sperm fertilize the egg and not somebody else's. And the number of sperm produced is proportional to testis size. And on the left, you've got data from primates, and on the right, data from all mammals. And it's very consistent. Testis size relative to body size is relatively low in species where a female only mates with one male. It's much higher in species where a female mates with multiple males. Gorillas in particular, a mature male will have a harem of several females and mate with them exclusively. Gorillas do not have particularly large testes. Chimps, on the other hand, when a female is in heat, she's been noted to have sex up to 80 times a day. Clearly, this is with multiple males, because if it was 80 times a day with a single male, that single male would die. And male chimps, as a result, have much larger testes and produce much more sperm. The Cape brown squirrel, females may go into heat at any time of year. They may mate with as many as 10 males in a few hours. And males will compete by disrupting each other's copulations. You know, a male will try to push the other guy off her. And they also compete by sperm production. These male ground squirrels have among the largest testes of any mammal relative to body size. I mean, dang, it's down to their knees. Good grief. There's some rodent species that have females that may mate with multiple males promiscuously. And this is one. These are sperm of the European wood mouse, Apodemus sylvaticus. And in this species, the sperm cells have hooks on their heads. And sperm cells from the same male can chemically recognize each other, hook up, hook together, and form these giant sperm trains that can swim faster than lone sperm can. So over there, D, over on the right of that picture, that's a whole bunch of sperm cells that are locking together and forming a sperm train. Sorry, I'm reminded of the old song by C.W. called, "'Cause we got a mighty convoy rocking through the night." Yes? Okay, never mind. So yeah, sperm from the same male will link up and help each other beat competitors. So that's more sperm competition for you. Males may also compete with each other by mate guarding, basically staying very close to a female and physically blocking anybody else. So this Nebraska tiger beetles, that's a male who's staying right on top of the female until she lays eggs. This is an insect I used to see an awful lot of in South Louisiana, where I grew up. We have big flocks of these in the summer. Plessia nearctica was locally known as the love bug, although it's not a bug, it's a fly. And they would mate, and the male would stay coupled with the female for several days, you know, blocking anybody else from mating with her because he's stuck in her. They would even fly around like this, and it was rather awkward. You know, if you have two flies that are stuck together by the genitals, it kind of makes it kind of hard to navigate. But they got around better than you might think. And yeah, I can remember seeing these used to be so common. They would, you know, if you were driving, they would clog your radiator air intake if you weren't careful. You'd end up with lots of dead ones on your hood, and you know, you actually had to wash the car pretty urgently, or the dead bugs would start damaging your paint. And yeah, that's a pretty extreme example of mate guarding, you know, physically using your tallywhacker to block the female's genital appendage until she's ready to lay those eggs. And then in other insects, males have penises that resemble Swiss Army knives, like these dragonflies. Believe in that picture, the male is the one in front because the female sperm intake is just behind her head. And dragonflies form this wheel shape when they mate. And dragonfly penises have these spoon-shaped bristly attachments that are used to scrape out the sperm of rivals. Well, it actually allows the female to exert some choice, because the female will take in male sperm and she can store it in an internal receptacle for some time. But if the female sees a better looking male, she'll mate with him and he will scrape out the sperm of the first guy and replace it with his. So dragonflies can basically mate with the best males that they can, and then if they find a better one, they can actually, you know, nullify that decision and, you know, mate with somebody better. Because insect reproductive organs are very complicated affairs. So much so that there was a company in Australia that designed a small piece of apparatus that if you had a dead insect, you could insert it and inflate the insect genitals so that you could see them clearly. Because many species, to identify them, you have to know the shape of the genitals. Yes, it's pretty common. You could have two different moths or what have you that outwardly look identical, except they've got very different male genitalia. And if these are moths that are potential agricultural pests, this is actually important to know. So they made this thing that would inflate insect genitalia so that you could see and document the extremely complicated shapes that they have and all of the little attachments that they've got. And yeah, they sold this device, which they call the fallow blaster. Okay, it gets even worse if we're talking about insect penises. That's the male organ of a very small weevil that can be a pest in, they'll eat black-eyed peas and Asian red beans, Asian adzuki beans. Maybe not the kind of thing you've got in your cupboard, but they can be a real pest of stored beans. And the males have, well, reproductive organs that look like this. And yes, they've got terrible spines on the end, because when a male mates with a female, he will mount her. She desperately tries to kick him off, by the way, and it's evidently not very pleasant. Because his reproductive organ causes rather bad wounds inside her reproductive organ. So he basically stabs her pretty badly internally, and it rather tends to discourage the female from mating a second time. So this is male-male competition, except it's playing out in the female's body. The people that documented this had to come up with ways to document insect copulation in real time. So they'd wait until insects were copulating and then immediately drop them in liquid nitrogen. And then dissect out the parts and see what the parts have been doing. And then with Drosophila, it's even chemical warfare. And this is neat. Remember I mentioned Bateman's rule. Bateman had been observing fruit fly behavior when he came up with this rule that males are competitive and promiscuous and females are coy and choosy, because that's the best strategy for each sex to successfully reproduce. What he didn't know is that Drosophila semen packs a serious chemical whammy because it's got chemicals that increase her egg production and decrease the female's, quote, libido. Now, what libido means in the case of something like a fruit fly, I don't know, but they do lower the odds that she'll be receptive to another male. So his semen's got chemicals that turn down the female's willingness to mate. They increase her egg production and they kill the sperm cells of other males. There's chemical warfare going on. Talk about your toxic masculinity. Unfortunately, those chemicals also poison the female herself. Females that mate live noticeably shorter lives than female fruit flies that don't, and this seems to be why. Which gives me this mental image of a fruit fly singing that song by Britney Spears. You're toxic. Well, he really is in this case. And this is partly why Bateman saw what he did. The reason why female fruit flies seemed reluctant and choosy to mate was not necessarily because that is what they've been selected for to do, but because these chemical compounds in male semen were manipulating their behavior. Isn't that just absolutely horrifying? There you go. This is why I love biology. Males sometimes compete not just in the bodies of females, but in the bodies of offspring. And one rather sinister version of that is infanticide. This was first documented in the 70s by Sarah Hrdy, HRDY, a real pioneer in evolutionary analysis of behavior. And she studied Indian monkeys known as langurs. And they live in a group of one male and several females. And the male is the father of the infants in the colony. And every so often you get a strange male that will try to take over the group. If he succeeds, he will immediately try to kill all of the babies in the group. Why would he do that? The females will not come into estrus if they're nursing. This is pretty widespread in mammals. It actually works in humans as well. Breastfeeding and very close contact between mother and offspring will suppresses ovulation. And it does in langurs as well. So think about it. If he's got genes that influence him to leave the babies alone, then it might be several months before he gets to father any of his own children. And in several months, maybe somebody else is going to take over the troop and drive him away. On the other hand, if he's got genes that influence him to kill the babies, he's not impairing his own evolutionary fitness because the babies are not related to him. And he's increasing his odds of reproducing because the females are going to come into heat that much sooner once they're no longer taking care of infants. So there is a horrible logic behind this, that if he succeeds, he will try, if he can, to kill every infant in the group, which will bring the females into estrus. It will make them fertile sooner. Lions, by the way, do the same thing. Remember, lions live in prides where you have a dominant male and several females, and the females do most of the hunting, and the male's main job is to have sex with the females and produce a bunch of lion cubs. A female with a newborn cub is not going to be receptive to a male for another 18 months. So if you have a strange male that leaves his pride, the pride he was born in, and takes over a new one, he will do everything possible to kill the cubs that are in the pride, so the females become receptive sooner. Incidentally, the females do fight to defend their own cubs. They'll form these communal cub rearing groups that they call creches to try to defend against the males. But if a male catches a cub out in the open, that cub is dead. Right? You can always tell when this is about to happen because the strange male goes around singing things like, "Yes, my teeth and ambitions are bare, be prepared." Right, Lion King, yeah. That, I mean, the Lion King is basically a retelling of Hamlet, but it's also based on actual behavior. You know, if Scar did take over the pride, Scar would in fact try to kill all of the offspring in the pride. Whether the cubs would really escape to be raised by a warthog and a meerkat that don't worry about anything, I'm not sure, but that the infanticide part is something that real lions actually do. And in the examples I've given before, it can sound like females are just kind of a passive battleground. You know, males might compete with each other in female bodies by cranking out the sperm or guarding the females physically, or in some species of rodent having penises that secrete glue that literally glue them shut. Yeah, I think there are rodents that do that. There's definitely insects that do that, that will deposit what's called a mating plug. That will, you know, put a stop to future mating attempts for a while. And I made it sound like females are just kind of sitting there and letting all this happen, but females exert choice as well. And this has probably been best studied in altricial birds. Bird species may be either precocial or altricial. Precocial birds, the offspring are born at a pretty advanced stage of development. They can move around on their own. Chickens would be precocial because baby chicks can run around within hours of hatching. Ducks would be precocial for the same reason. Baby ducks can get around and can at least swim very soon after hatching. These American robins, however, are altricial because the young are completely helpless and can't do anything but hold their mouths open. And both parents have to invest huge amounts of resources. We talked earlier that Bateman's rule predicts that the sex that invests more is the one that will be the most selective. It goes haywire when you look at altricial birds because both parents have to invest a great deal, bringing food to the babies. Anybody ever see that cartoon? There's two robins perched on a baby carriage with a very happy baby in it. And one robin says to the other, "It's still hungry. I've been stuffing worms into it all day." Right. Many altricial bird species do form pair bonds, not necessarily lasting a lifetime, but at least through the breeding season, you'll have one male and one female that will pair up, build a nest, and work together, taking care of the offspring. It used to be thought that birds were not just socially monogamous, they were sexually monogamous as well. That whenever you saw a pair of birds taking care of a nest of eggs, they were both the parents. That the male was the father and the female was the mother. And that kind of fell apart in the 70s when genetic methods got good enough that we could do paternity tests. And it turns out that most nesting birds are not sexually monogamous at all. Both females and males will actively seek out EPCs, standing for extra pair copulation. Both will try to copulate with other partners if they get the chance. Now, when giving this lecture, I used to say the development of genetic testing methods basically prove that birds are total hoe bags. But I try not to use terms like this anymore because, again, it's very easy to see human behavior reflected here. And you really should not do that. Analyzing human behavior in evolutionary terms is very controversial. I will actually try to get to that tomorrow. There's a whole field that tries to do that. It's called evolutionary psychology. But there's a lot of problems with it. Human behavior is extremely complicated because we have a long evolutionary history, but we've also got learning and culture and things like that, and this makes us act freaking weird. Try not to impose human value judgments on what other species do. You know, birds are not hobags. The red-winged blackbirds that I always see as I drive into work, you know, are not engaged in, you know, some kind of promiscuous soap opera crap that rivals Dallas and Dynasty. Those were soap operas back when I was a kid. They do what they do, and it makes sense for them. And you're not going to understand it if you judge them the way you would judge people doing the same thing. So birds are not being promiscuous because saying that implies a value judgment. They're engaging in extra pair copulations, and there's reasons for that. And it seems clear that it should be adaptive for males, like the finch on the left, to seek out extra pair copulations, which is what he's trying to do to the finch on the right. You know, if you're a male and you seek out lots of EPCs, you will have more offspring than males that don't, right? The more females you mate with, the greater the odds are that you're going to leave offspring. But Bateman's rule says you wouldn't think this would be adaptive for females because females invest more, and females have, for that reason, they have a much greater limitation on how many offspring they can have. A male that mates with 10 females can potentially have 10 offspring. But a female that mates with 10 males, that's not going to make her lay more eggs, right? So you would not predict it would be adaptive for females to seek out EPCs. But it's been hypothesized that females might seek out EPCs as insurance against genetic incompatibility. The last slide I showed you guys yesterday was a slide of pseudoscorpions. And that's a species where females mate with multiple males. And the reason is that for some quirk in the way their genes are arranged, there's a fairly high chance that a female might have some kind of incompatibility with any individual male. She's got a fairly good chance of not being able to have offspring if she only mates with one male. If she mates with several, she's got a much better chance of reproducing. And it's been hypothesized that something similar might be going on in birds, that a female bird that mates with only one male might not leave many offspring because that one male might somehow be genetically incompatible with her. So she mates with multiple males, she's hedging her bets. But at least in reed buntings, a little bird native to Europe, this seems to be unlikely. There's no correlation between the number of EPCs and the number of eggs in a nest that turned out to be infertile. So at least in that species, that doesn't seem to be going on. It could be in other species. Yes.
So the females will be providing one nest, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the eggs they lay. Would the male also have one nest they would be providing for, or?
Oh no, the males would only be providing for one nest, but they would mate with females in other nests if they get the chance. Yes. So yeah, if the male can do that a lot, then not only will he have more offspring, he won't have to take care of all of them. You know, the males of the nest that his offspring are in are going to be left holding the bag, as it were. All right. But there have been hypotheses to the effect that females seek out EPCs to males of high genetic quality. And some support for this came out in 2012 when Nicole Gerlach and company studied dark-eyed juncos. I know I think we get this species around here. I think I've seen them. And they calculated the fitness of individual birds by calculating the mean number of offspring that they had. And it turns out that offspring that are produced by EPCs leave more offspring themselves than nestmates that were produced by within-pair copulations. So for some reason, I'm not sure exactly why, the offspring that are produced by extra-pair copulations go on to leave more of their own offspring than the offspring produced by within-pair copulations. So if the female bird has pairs up with one male, but finds another male that she's not paired with who has very high quality genes that, will produce very strong and vigorous and fertile offspring, then it's to her advantage, as it were, to mate with him, even if she's not paired with him. Am I making sense there? And again, the female is not necessarily thinking through all of this. I mean, the female's a bird. It's not like the female is thinking, oh, I love my husband, but ooh, that guy over there is, really strong and really handsome, and he's got a PhD, and I do love my husband, but I bet he'd make pretty awesome babies. She's not thinking that. When I say that it's in her interests, I don't mean that she's able to calculate this stuff because, she's a bird. Birds are smart, but probably not that smart. What I'm saying is that a female that doesn't seek out extra pair copulations will have offspring that themselves have fewer offspring than a female that does seek out extra pair copulations. So a female that seeks out EPCs will have not more offspring, but more grandkids than a female that doesn't. So that means selection in this case ought to favor any sort of gene that makes it likelier that a female will seek out an EPC. And then some studies on reed buntings. That's a reed bunting from the Netherlands again, that shows that extra pair young are more heterozygous than their half siblings. So females seem to be picking not necessarily genetically superior males, but genetically dissimilar males. Again, because it's advantageous to maintain diversity and maintain heterozygosity. Females that mate with close relatives are going to have offspring with high homozygosity. And that can be a bad thing because offspring might end up being homozygous for things that are not desirable. Females that are mating with genetically dissimilar males may end up having more offspring survive, and better quality offspring than females that don't. Remember hybrid vigor or heterosis? You can hybridize two different crop varieties and you end up with something that may be superior to either parent. This may be going on here. Females that seek out matings to genetically dissimilar males may have more and better offspring than females that don't. Okay, that actually brings me to the end of that slide presentation. I still feel like I need to use the time efficiently, so go ahead and take about a 5-minute break. Tell you what, it's 11:42. Come back at 11:50 and I'll try to wrap this up. Don't everybody run for the exit. So yeah, give you about 8 minutes. Actually, you know what? Rethinking that for just a second. Go ahead and put